there, fictional friends, and welcome to another episode of Fully Booked. I'm Megan.
And I'm Shireen.
And it is officially the month of February, which means it's time for a new theme. And yes, it's February, it's Valentine's Day, it's the month of love, but who cares about that?
Wow.
Because we're talking about paranormal and supernatural this month. Yeah. So anything in that realm, which really, to be fair, paranormal and supernatural occurrences and aspects of stories can be in so many different genres at this point, which is definitely part of like a discussion that we're going to have this month.
Yeah.
But, you know.
And I would say we're definitely trying to stick more to the paranormal.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, you know, you're right to an extent.
Supernatural, then you're like putting in like vampires
and werewolves and stuff like that, which like they count, but you know.
But then I would be talking about Twilight again. And
we promise we're not really going to bring it up that much this month, I hope. She says in a hopeful tone.
She says as in, stop it.
As in, please stop. We need to stop. Why are we still doing this? Exactly. And for some reason also, so far 2024 for some reason makes us make these decisions where we pick like a terrible film adaptation as the first choice of the month.
It's for entertainment, really.
I think so. I don't know what it is. Maybe people hate it when we're like annoyed with a movie, but personally, I find it gives us a lot to talk about.
Definitely.
Yeah. So to kick things off for Paranormal Month, I feel like this is going to be really a lot for people because I had no idea until you brought this up when we were trying to decide on films for this month. I had no idea this was based on a book. So this week we're talking about the 2005 adaptation of Just Like Heaven starring Reese Witherspoon and Mark Ruffalo.
No way, you don't exist. It's one of those dreams and you know you're dreaming.
Get out! Another one, my.
I've been sort of seeing someone that's not there.
You mean she's emotionally unavailable?
You are.
I can't remember.
How is it that I can see her and no one else can?
Righteous.
I know it's crazy. She's right here with us right now.
Could you just hold on just a sec?
Get the hell out of here, you freak!
The apartment upstairs, it belonged to a young woman.
I don't know of a single date that she'd ever been on.
She was like a cat lady without any cats.
She's a little dog.
God knows she wasn't dating anybody.
I did not know that this was a book until you told me when we I really think it shows like a really great sort of the dichotomy between you and I as people, because when we decided, we were like, hey, paranormal would be cool. I'm like, okay, I'm like this horror movie, like we have this one, these are all based on books, and Shireen's just like, oh, there's Just Like Heaven, and I was like, what?
And I know this because I actually read the book.
Okay, so Just Like Heaven is actually based on a French novel from 1999 called If Only Were True, or a Si C'était Vrai, which is a novel by Mark Levy. I had no idea that this was a thing at all. I was really surprised when you said this. I like looked it up when you told me, because I was like, no, it's not. No, because I was like, I don't believe that a mid-aughts rom-com
was based on a book.
That's insane. That makes no sense to me at all. And yet here we are, and I'm proven wrong. Apparently.
And I only read the book because at my French high school, it was one of the few romance novels on the summer reading list, I believe.
Oh, right, yeah.
Yeah, and I was like, yeah, I could do that one.
Yeah, sure, I can just get that one done, like, over the summer, basically.
And it wasn't like, Les Miserables or something.
Yeah, like a big tome that you were going to have to really, really, like, force yourself through or something. Yeah, it's just like you get to the summer, and they're just like, do you know what you could do over the summer? Just read Dr. Zhivago. Like,
oh, the number of times that stuff like that was on the list, and I'm like, where's the romance one?
You're like, oh, God, where's it? Well, technically, Dr. Zhivago is kind of a romance, but there's just... It's also just like depressing. Anyway, okay, so Just Like Heaven was released in 2005. If you forgot about this movie, you're not the only one.
It's terrible.
Yeah. Currently has a score of 6.7 out of 10 on IMDb and 54% on Rotten Tomatoes, which personally I think is a little high.
It really is.
I don't know if to an extent at the time that's... Oh my God, the audience score is 75%.
What?
Wow.
Okay, this movie is so bad.
It's barren.
I was the one who recommended it because I knew this one was going to go off on a horror tangent month.
And then she was the first one when she watched it first, and she's the first one texting me, this is so fucking terrible. We just should have watched something different. And I was like, okay.
I was ready to abandon it halfway through the movie and be like, can we just watch Ghost or something?
Is Ghost based on a book?
I don't know.
Oh my gosh, Shireen, you can't just say that.
I just wanted to watch anything but this. Anyway.
Okay. Anyway, This film stars Reese Witherspoon as Elizabeth Masterson, who is a resident. Is she a resident or a doctor?
In the movie, she's a full-on doctor. In the book, she's a resident.
A resident. I think she's a full. Yeah, you're right. She's
also, her name is Lauren.
An emergency room. Yeah, sorry, an emergency room doctor in the San Francisco area who is like, you know, a full-on workaholic. Of course, I love that she's like a crazy workaholic who works like, what is she the
26 hours
26 hour shifts, looking like Reese Witherspoon at the end of it, which I'm like, okay. Yeah, sure. Her hair still looks pretty good for somebody who's just worked 26 hours in an emergency room. So she's a total workaholic. One particular evening, her sister and brother-in-law are having people over for dinner, and they want to like do like a blind date thing and introduce her to this guy. She winds up taking off later than she would have because she, again, is really, really obsessed with work. And she also wants to be, I think, offered a permanent position a promotion, if I'm not mistaken.
I think it's between her and two of her colleagues, and she wants to be offered, like... No, you're right. She is a resident in the movie because I think it's like a head resident position.
Okay, so she wants to be offered like the permanent position at that hospital as opposed to somewhere else, and she is offered it at the beginning.
Yes, but the main her boss says to her, "You have to go home."
Yeah, he's like, "Listen, you've been here for over a day. Please leave."
Yeah.
And of course, in her haste and on her way to this dinner at her sister's place, she gets into a really bad car wreck, and we don't really see what else has happened at that point. We just see that she gets into this terrible car accident. Then we meet, David Abbott, who is a landscape architect, who's moving into a new apartment, which we do see is Elizabeth's apartment. And we're assuming this is like a number of weeks, months later. We don't know, maybe years, who knows. David very quickly is shown to be like a mess of a human being. He has a pretty severe drinking issue.
And like, you know, I was just very confused watching it because it's like he's got a drinking issue. He's clearly spending his entire days and nights just at his apartment.
Yeah.
I don't feel like he's working at all. Like, and so I'm like, how is he affording rent? Like, it just seems like everything is falling apart.
I also have to question a little bit. I'm like, wow, this is my rom-com love interest, like, ooh.
Yeah, like, ooh. Real, you know, I think he needs some therapy,
like maybe perhaps like some counseling before.
Like, I don't know, like, again, are we going down the toxic trope of love will cure him? Spoiler alert,
kinda,
it does.
Yeah, kinda. That is kind of where it goes. Yeah. So David is looking for a new apartment to lease, and Elizabeth's happens to be one of the ones that's available, but he doesn't really know anything about the situation other than that it's a short-term lease right now. Like, they're not looking for like a year-long lease. It's month to month at the moment, and they won't say why. Yeah. So he moves in because it's the best option. And shortly after getting there, all of a sudden one evening when he's like wandering around in the apartment, Elizabeth appears and thinks that he's broken into her apartment. And they have this really strange sort of interaction where he's like, oh my God, you're in my apartment. And she's like, no, you're in my apartment.
Right.
And she seemingly not long after that vanishes into thin air. And he's like, what the fuck is going on?
Yeah, he like actually thinks he's gone crazy. And I think in the book, so in the book, the difference is that she does get into the car accident, but she wakes up next to her comatose body. So she knows immediately that she's in a coma. And so then she gets frustrated because nobody can see her. And she goes over to her apartment and meets this architect whose name is Arthur in the book, not David, and realizes he can see her. And so they start striking up a conversation.
Right. Okay. So that, I feel like that's probably an easier introduction. I know that this is supposed to be some sort of like enemies to lovers meet cute situation that they have, because basically she thinks he's like some kind of squatter and he thinks that she's a crazy lady who keeps breaking into his apartment.
Right.
Until he realizes that she like disappears, because at one point she goes to call the police and her hand literally goes through the phone.
Well, he's telling her like, oh my God, you're dead, you're dead, you're dead.
Yeah. Yeah. And you know, she refuses to believe it at first, which is normal. I think we'd all like to be in denial if we're told that we're dead. Like, Jesus. And so after, I guess, some back and forthing about things, you know, she comes to realize, like, God, I guess maybe I am dead. Or, like, but who am I? Because she can't even remember her own name.
Right, or who she was, what she did, or anything.
So they decide to start kind of investigating to figure out who she was. He calls the real estate broker, but she has no information for him. as the family hasn't really indicated anything to her, like as far as what the situation was with Elizabeth. So he visits her neighbors. None of them are helpful because she was such a workaholic, of course, that she was never home and she never got to know her neighbors. So they were like, oh God, yeah, there was somebody living in that apartment. No idea.
Yeah.
They shoehorn in this stupid thing with like some hot girl who lives downstairs.
Oh my God.
Who starts flirting with him for no reason. And I was like, what's the point of this? I don't get it. And she's like ridiculously forward. It's very strange and very tropish. Like, it's just not something that would happen.
But it's also like harassment. Like, she's like bordering on like sexual harassment.
It's a little much.
And I'm just like, I don't think that we accept this kind of like trope anymore.
No, I don't. I don't think so. And it's just very like, I don't know. It's just very like, oh, well, the male main character must be desirable, so other women are going to throw themselves at him. And I'm like, women don't regularly do that, right?
No.
Like, that's not really much of a thing that happens.
No.
Yeah. So when David starts looking into, I guess, like ghosts and like psychic phenomena and things like that and what could be going on, he goes to this bookstore and starts looking into the information. Then what's this character's name? He meets this character who works at the bookstore named Daryl, played by Napoleon Dynamite. No, I don't know his actual name.
I was watching this movie. I watched the entire movie and I'm looking at this character going, where do I know him from? And then when Megan was watching it, she texted me right away and she's like, oh my God, Napoleon Dynamite's in this? And I'm like, oh, that's who he is.
The fun difference between Shireen and I is that the minute that I don't know who someone is, but they like, I recognize them, I will go look it up. And she just sits for the whole film and is like, who is that? Who is that?
Because it's like a game at that point, okay? And especially for this movie, because it was so boring, it was keeping me semi-entertained,
So David enlists Daryl's help because Daryl seems to have some sort of psychic ability. Very vague. We're not really sure what it is. It's mostly just, it's really just the filmmakers capitalizing off the fact that Napoleon Dynamite had come out maybe a couple of years before this and had been so insanely popular that this guy could just play a weird character and everybody would, I guess, be into it, but they're not because it's stupid and it's not good and it doesn't advance anything or help anything other than to have this character give you a few exposition dumps of like coming over to the apartment and he can't see or hear Elizabeth, but he can feel her.
Yeah.
And he's like, whoa, yeah, no, she's way too strong, way too intense. I don't think this girl is dead. Like, this is weird. She doesn't seem like she's actually dead because I can feel her way more than I would expect to be able to. And at the same time, Daryl points out, again, things that we have not really been privy to, only in very vague context as to, like, why David is, like, depressed and pitiful all the time.
And I really feel like they don't take enough time on this piece.
They definitely don't take it very seriously.
No, like, the guy is, like, completely falling apart one minute, and then the next minute is like, oh, yeah, by the way, and you've got something weird going on with you, and we just kind of swat that subject away a little bit,
Yeah, that's it. So what it turns out happened, of course, like, Elizabeth initially thinks that David's a big fat mess because he was dumped by a woman or something and he won't get over it. But, of course, that's not the case. He's a widower. His wife passed away, I think, sometime within the past year or so.
Very suddenly. She had like a stroke, didn't she?
Cerebral hematoma or something. Yeah. She had like an embolism, basically, just very, very sudden out of nowhere. She was young. She was fine.
Yeah.
And obviously he's, still grieving and having a really difficult time moving on from that, which is very understandable. But not once do we see this character visit a therapist or go through any motions to cope with said grief other than drink himself into a stupor and talk to a maybe not ghost.
My issue with this is that, so in the book, he's grieving his mother's death.
Yeah.
Now, grieving your mother's death, not to take away anything from it, is very different than grieving your wife's
partner's death,
sudden death.
Yeah.
And like his wife died right in front of him, and quite, by the way that he describes it, in quite like a very shocking, like traumatic way.
Yeah,
for
she
him.
Basically sat down, said her head hurt, and then pretty much collapsed and didn't wake up again.
And then didn't wake up.
Yeah.
This man is like in the very early stages of grief, and like, again, there's no timeline for grief, and even if it had been like I don't even think he says when she died. Did he?
I don't think so. I took from context, like I kind of inferred that it seems to have been sometime within the last year or so.
Right.
I think.
So let's say it's within the last year. Let's say it was 5 years ago. Based on his behavior, he is so far in his grief. Like, he is nowhere near getting out of his grief.
Yes, yeah.
That the rest of the movie from this point on makes zero effing sense to me.
Yeah.
Also, Reese Witherspoon and Mark Ruffalo have zero chemistry.
Oh, yeah, sorry,
I thought
guys.
that this was going to be like a friendship kind of thing.
Yeah, because the thing is, they're both good actors, and it's really not that. It's just that, like, with the writing and everything, their chemistry together just doesn't exist, and there are only really they really most of the time just spend their time talking.
Yeah.
And other than pieces of dialogue that tell you that they're falling in love with each other, quote unquote, they don't seem to be. They just seem to be people who are helping one another. Like, there really doesn't seem, it's not giving me anything to be like, oh boy, wow, these two are really, really falling for each other. Like, you don't see it happening at all. It's just the dialogue tells you that it is.
Exactly. Like, it's a forced, like,
very much.
Hey, person watching this movie, now this is what's happening. Like,
exactly.
So when that girl is like comically throwing herself at him, you know, Elizabeth is standing there in the hallway and she's like, you should just go and be with her. She obviously wants to be with you. And he's like, no, I don't want
He's like, no,
her.
I don't want that. And you're like,
okay. And you're like, because it's kind of odd. And then you're like, oh, is this going to be a love thing? Like, it honestly took me a minute.
No, it's true. It had been like a long time since I saw it, and I remember that's it. It was like, obviously they get together at the end, blah, blah. There is no spoiler alert needed for that. It's like a rom-com from the mid-2000s. Come on, we all know how that ends. But it's really, I guess I just never paid attention to how poorly sewn together it was until I like watched it again. But anyway, back to the whole thing. Part of the, I guess, researching that they're doing, they're in this restaurant and a man has like a medical emergency, and Elizabeth is able to walk David through how to help him. And that's how they realize she's a doctor. And there is a hospital close by, which was the hospital that she worked at. So they go there, and that's how the discovery is made that she's not dead. Like Daryl said, she is in fact in a coma after that car accident 3 months ago, per what we're given to understand, I think, is what like the other doctor says.
That's right. 3 months.
Yeah.
And again, going back to like the whole notion that in the movie you don't know if she's dead or not to begin with. Genuinely thought this was some sort of friendship story where like he was gonna help this ghost like go over to the other side,
move on or whatever. Yeah, that's it. So anyway, when the whole indication of like, you know, like, okay, maybe we can do something about this is that he touches her hand and she feels it. And she's like, I felt that, like that you did that. So like, I'm still there enough potentially. But at the same time, different information, you know, of course things have to come in to kind of complicate things more, because of course it's been several months. She's not really shown any sign of recovery particularly, and so of course now, you know, the hospital is speaking to her sister about taking her off of life support, because they're kind of at the point where they're like, we don't know if she's ever going to wake up, if she's ever going to recover. It just doesn't seem like it right now. So that's kind of what's being given to her, and she's obviously, you know, very hesitant to do that, totally understandably. This is her sister, and basically is just like very angrily like, I will think about it. Like, I'm not gonna say yes right now. I will think about it.
I mean, it doesn't help that the doctor asking her to do this is the douchey other resident who got Elizabeth's position over
only
her.
After she wound up in a fucking coma as well. Yeah. This is supposed to be the stuff where like there are scenes after where they're, I guess, bonding over montages where she finds out that that's it. He was a landscape architect before. He built really nice gardens, and she's like, I used to come here and blah, 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 blah. And I think this is where they're shoehorning in the love story where you're suddenly like, oh, okay, sure.
It definitely is shoehorned in. Like, that is a very good term for it.
Yeah,
it's
I feel like it is.
Oh, let's like put some in here.
Exactly. So obviously things take more of a turn because they're trying to make this, like, to fix this, but obviously things take more of a turn when David gets a call from his realtor who's like, oh, hey, guess what? You can have a long-term lease. Like, they're going to offer it to you. And he's like, why? And the realtor's like, well, unfortunately, you know, that's it. This woman it was tragic. She had a car accident, but it's been a few months and they're taking her off of life support. And he's like, fuck.
And then they just start freaking across town.
Yeah, so then it becomes like a whole like race against the clock kind of thing, because we need to pick up the pace, obviously, in order to come to an end. And so David's like, okay, I need you to tell me things about your sister and stuff, because I need to convince her not to take you off of life support. Goes over to her apartment, and then that's it. The one secret that she has that literally like no one else knows is that apparently like 5 minutes before her sister got married, she made out with her ex-boyfriend. JJ. Yeah. And so, of course, when he tells her this, the sister is this really funny actress. I've seen her and stuff before. And she like freaks out in this really appropriate way and kicks him out of her place. But of course, also, I guess just to give us that extra bit, it can't just be that David tells her something that no one else would know about. No. It's also that the niece, for some reason, sees Elizabeth when she's there. And
yeah, like, the two little girls are having like a tea party, and then the younger one goes and gets Elizabeth a cookie and puts it in front of her because she can see her.
And she's like, oh, can you see me?
Yeah. And then when he leaves, the little girl says, is Aunt Elizabeth having more tea? And
and the mom's like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
So they decide to like spend their last day together, whatever. And then the next day he's like, no, we're not going to let this happen. We need to do something. And she's like, well, I mean, I don't know what you can do other than like steal my body from the hospital. And he's like, okay, we're doing that. And she's like, you need somebody to help you. And his friend, this guy who we've seen in a couple of scenes previous to this.
The one who encouraged him to keep drinking, I believe.
Oh, yeah. That was fucked up. He's his friend Jack. That's it. Who, by the way, I realized during their first conversation, Jack's a therapist.
What?
Yeah, he is.
Oh, God.
Yeah, I know.
Oh, my God.
I know. It's fucked up. Anyway.
I did not catch that.
Oh, yeah. No, I did. And I was like, and then the way he acts for the entire movie, I was like, what's happening right now?
Not the type of therapist you would want.
Not at all. So he enlists Jack to help him. And it turns out they find out through conversation, because they get to the hospital and he sees Elizabeth, and Jack's like, oh my God, it's Elizabeth. And David's like, why the fuck do you know who Elizabeth is? And he's like, I used to date her sister. So it turns out that Jack is the JJ that made out with the sister right before her wedding. Right. And of course, David says this to him, and he's like, whoa, why do you know that? No one knows that.
Yeah, and Elizabeth's standing there going, I knew I recognized him.
And she's like, I knew I recognized him. He's, what is it, older and hairier, but it's him.
Aren't we all?
I feel that. They steal her. That's it. They try to steal her body, I should say. They try to take her body out of the hospital, but obviously, oh yes, okay, sorry, before I continue with that, this is also a scene where, again, this is why we're getting the whole, like, oh, it was meant to happen kind of thing, because it turns out that on the night of the accident, David was the man that Elizabeth was meant to be meeting, because she was like, oh, he's a friend of a friend, because I guess he's a friend of Jack's, right? Yeah. So she was like, he's a friend of a friend, he's really nice, you should meet him. And I'm sure that Jack, like, was shoving David into this situation because he was like, please get over your dead wife, yikes, and go meet someone else.
Yikes, therapist.
Yeah, for real. But of course, that's it. She got into her accident, and it turns out I think David flaked and he never went to that dinner in the first place. So... anyway,
I have no words. Like this movie is so boring.
It's like, so boring.
We're making it sound a lot more exciting than it actually is.
Yeah, it's true. Can confirm there's really nothing like exciting about it. Particularly, I mean, I guess if you're like a Reese Witherspoon fan or a Mark Ruffalo fan, sure,
you'd be disappointed.
Yeah, probably. To be fair, Shireen texts me halfway through the movie. She's like, "Oh, Mark Ruffalo was still in his sexy phase at this point." I was like, "Did he have a sexy phase?" I think she meant in his rom-com phase, because he'd done 13 going on 30 also.
No, he was cute.
Okay. Not my
and
type.
Then I realized it's because he's kind of like a dorky nerd, and I'm like, oh, he's like my husband.
It's like my husband. She's so funny. I love how on brand everybody is about these things. Every time one of us is attracted to a guy in a movie, we realize, well, not all the time, but unless it's the total opposite of the partner that we're with, if it's like the nice guy character, I'm like, oh God, it's because he's like my fiance. Yeah. Kind exactly. of. That's why. Anyway. Okay, so so of course they have this whole meant to be moment, and that is when David decides to declare that he's in love with Elizabeth, which you're like, what? Why?
Oh God, it doesn't make sense. Like, again, he's just just cured of his grief
immediately because he's fallen in love with another woman, which I'm like, that just seems like it's a rebound, but sure.
And it's literally like, it's been like how long, the timeline of this movie? Like 3 weeks?
Yeah, like, I don't know, maybe like a month-ish.
Like,
2.
she's been in a coma for 3 months.
Yes, yeah.
They've had time to put her apartment up, like give enough of a delay for her to wake up, put her apartment for rent, somebody else move in, them have this whole montage of trying to figure out who she is, a montage of him going and getting like different people into the apartment to try and like expel her
God,
spirit.
I forgot about that. Yeah, there's a really dumb montage with like Ghostbusters and
Ghostbusters and like all sorts of things. This movie has a lot of montages,
they're so corny and over the top. Like,
I mean, it's very 2005.
Oh
right?
God, it sure is.
And so it's like, so in this time frame, which must only be about a month, he's like, it must be like a week that he's fallen in love with her in total. And I really struggle with it. Like, it gives me the ick, to be honest.
Yeah. So as they're trying to take Elizabeth out of the hospital.
Who's Abby?
Her sister is Abby. Anyway, Abby shows up. Security stops him as well because other doctors have realized that he's not a doctor and does not work at that hospital. Security stops him as well. And then in all of the commotion, her like breathing tube has come out, which also that can't be true. It's like shoved down your throat.
I don't think that it's like anchored in there.
No, but if she's intubated, like, wouldn't that be anyway?
Well, I think it's like down your mouth, right? Like, I don't think it's like a tracheotomy.
I don't know.
No. Because if you're down her mouth.
Okay, whatever. I don't know how this works. I don't know doctor things.
Yeah.
Anyway, it doesn't matter. I'm sure this movie doesn't know them either. So, of course, and then she's like, "Oh God," it's like, and she disappears, like her spirit or whatever you'd like to call it.
She's like, it's all getting so.
She's like,
so. What does she say?
Hazy, probably, or something. Yeah, that's it. So she disappears, and then of course this is what caused. Which I'm like, really, that fixed everything? Just all you had to do was rip out that breathing tube, and she's fine.
Rip that bad boy out like a Band-Aid.
Yeah, that's it. So Elizabeth wakes up, and she of course recognizes Abby, who's her sister, but she doesn't recognize David when she sees him.
And that makes sense because she knew him as a spirit.
Yeah, as an astral projection. I don't know what she's supposed to be.
I don't know.
Anyway, of course, he gets all sad boy about it.
Yeah, he does.
And leaves and goes on a sad boy montage of sitting on park benches.
It's another montage. It's true. He has a whole like moment sitting on a park bench
and being all sad.
I'm like, okay.
Yeah. So he gets very sad boy about it. She, kind of gets back to her life slowly but surely. And then one day when she goes back to her apartment, she's drawn up to the rooftop where David has made this really beautiful garden because she had mentioned in passing earlier on that she thought it would be nice to do something really nice in the rooftop like area that she has with the lease, I guess. I don't know. Usually the rooftop wouldn't be just for one person, but
makes
whatever.
No sense. Also, her apartment is massive.
Oh, it's absolutely. And San Francisco is one of the most expensive cities in the world to live in.
Like, I get it.
I know she's a doctor, but damn.
But she's a resident, and it's got like 4 bedrooms.
It's insane. It's massive. It's absolutely huge. There's an entire huge hallway that you can see 3 or 4 bedrooms and in a bathroom, and you're like, what the fuck? How big is this place?
Like they could film an entire sitcom in that apartment.
Oh, it's crazy. Yeah, no, it's like it's absurd. It's like a Friends or New Girl level apartment that you're like, how big are these fucking apartments, guys? And these like absolutely massive cities like New York and LA and San Francisco, like these huge cities that are very expensive. It's crazy. Anyway, so she's drawn up onto the roof, and when she gets there, she finds David, and he's, made it into this whole, like, very beautifully landscaped, like, garden.
And then all of her memories come back in the form of a montage.
Oh, God. Oh, I forgot how much we used to have montages. It still happens, don't get me wrong, it still happens a lot in movies.
But it's more in, like, an ironic sense.
Kind of, yeah, that's it. It's usually, anyway. Yeah. But, oh, my God, did we love a montage, like, 20-odd years ago. It's crazy. And of course, all of her memories come back, and he says he's done it all for her, blah, blah, and then they kiss. and the movie ends. Because also, that's a good hallmark of like very PG rom-coms from the late 90s and early 2000s. There was usually one kiss between the characters right at the end of the movie, which I'd really like to think is where Hallmark came in after with all of their stuff. You get one kiss at the end and that's it.
Because it's all about their love.
Yeah, exactly. And so whatever. And then you, and then there's this really weird random thing where for some reason their rooftop garden fades into a snow globe that Daryl is holding and he's like, sweet. And then the movie cuts to credits and it doesn't make sense.
Daryl?
The Napoleon Dynamite.
Oh, right. Yeah. Oh, no. What he says is, oh shit, what does he say?
I don't know.
Oh, it's like something, he's got like this one line, this word that he keeps saying, like, not like totally tubular, but like something like that.
Yeah, it's dumb. And also, what did that have to do with anything? We've only spoken about one particularly
righteous. That's what he keeps saying. Righteous.
Yeah.
Sorry.
We've only spoken about one particularly paranormal thing, which is really just Elizabeth herself in this movie. There's been no mention of magic in any way, shape, or form. Where the fuck did that come from? That was like the ending of Krampus when they're all in the snow globe, except that makes more sense.
Yeah, maybe that's your supernatural element.
Oh, God.
And we're back.
Yeah. Oh, it's terrible, guys. It's so bad. It's so boring. Like, it moves at a snail's pace for some reason, even though it's not that long of a film, particularly. And the characters have no chemistry. Like, the actors have no chemistry at all in the film. So there's just nothing. There's nothing that keeps you interested in what's going on.
No.
You know, it's one of those sort of background things where I was easily able to have this sort of movie playing while I was working. And
I think I was on my phone the whole time.
Yeah, and still followed the entire plot of the film because it's not like it's anything complicated, but there was no time where I was ever so intrigued that I needed to turn around and really pay attention to it the whole time, you know?
And I get it. I can hear y'all thinking, like, it's a rom-com from 2005. What do you expect? But, like, I don't know, something.
Well, it's been almost 20 years since this movie came out, and I think that we're kind of getting to the point now where a lot of these things just, like, don't work anymore. Like, I think we've started slowly but surely to move past a lot of these kinds of, like, just writing something, you know, writing a film, putting a cast in it that's recognizable, throwing it at the wall and hoping it sticks kind of thing. Like, we don't really do that quite as often anymore, and there tends to be more thought that goes into, like, actually making a good film. So I think that makes a difference now, but you can just feel it with something like this. And it doesn't mean I'm generalizing. I'm not saying that every movie in the early aughts was like this, but there were just a lot of rom-coms, like, in about a 10-year span or so that were very, very similar to this.
And to your earlier point, like, you know, what we were saying in this one is that there was some serious subject matter that they were, like, trying to make comedic almost, or like just kind of glossing over.
Which, like, that's not funny. And his wife died.
You were saying earlier, like, that was something that they did a lot of, like, at that time period.
Yeah,
and
we
you
really
could, like, look back at some of these rom-coms and be like, ooh.
Yeah, there was definitely, I can't, like, look, there were so many, it's really difficult to think of a bunch of them, like, off the cuff, kind of. But I find also, like, even if I'm just thinking of, like, Reese Witherspoon films, there were just even other movies of hers that she made around the same time that were very comedic, because, like, let's face it, Reese Witherspoon's up there with, like, the rom-com queens of like, the 90s and 2000s for sure. But there were other movies of hers that could still be fun and silly and everything, but still tackle certain issues with like a more clever kind of, like, Legally lens.
Blonde.
Yeah, like, you know, like, she's sexually harassed by her teacher.
Yeah.
You know, and
that was not okay. They didn't make a joke out of it.
They don't make a joke out of it. Yeah. It is taken seriously. Her reaction to it is serious, and, like, her response later on in the film is serious. And that's, like, a silly, goofy movie to an extent, but there's just so much more of a good underlying message behind it, where then you look at this and you're like, oh my God.
Yeah.
Terrible. Anyway. I would love to know if anybody knew that this book existed. I couldn't believe that Shireen knew. So.
And I read it.
Yeah, you did. So if you have, or if you've seen this movie, maybe you like this movie and we've just spent like 30 minutes shitting all over it.
I'm fully expecting a letter from Reese Witherspoon at this point.
She's getting all pissed at us. Sorry. She probably knows. She's smart. Anyway, you can let us know what you thought about all of that over on Instagram, Threads, and TikTok at FullyBookedCA. You can also check out our Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/book was way better. But until next week, guys, keep on reading.
Thanks, everyone.